So let's take a look at making my rather busy live loop setup and putting it into a much bigger board to make things a little bit easier. When I'm setting up at the minute with that board, I have things that I have to add on top. Things were getting tight. When I'm closing the lid, it's all a bit busy and a bit tight and contracted. So I bought this new flight case from Swan Flight Cases, custom built, with specific dimensions, just to give me that bit more room and a bit more headspace on top. I had to put my Midas MR12 in a way that everything can access the ports. At the minute, I'm using adapters and looms to get into the ports. Got my Voice Live 3 Extreme, which I use for vocal and for guitar effects. And that's kind of like the effect hub, if you will, on my left side of my board. The Looper X from Sheeran Loopers, which is my looping loop board of choice. That's quite bigger than my old footprint. And then I've got the MC8 Morningstar MIDI controller, which I use to control the looper and some lighting. Loopy ABY switch for my mic to switch into my looper or to the main board. Got a kick trigger for my Roland HPD20, which I use as a bass drum. I've then got this new TC Helicon Infinite Sustainer. I have a router that controls the mixer because sadly the router inside the mixer isn't great, so this gives me better coverage. Then I've got these Sennheiser belt packs which I use for my mic receivers, guitar receivers, and also for my IEM transmitters. And I want all that to be powered by one single power point in, which will be a power con, as well as a power con out if I need to put any auxiliary stuff into it as well. So the next step was to get a to-scale drawing of my pedal board, get the dimensions of everything, and start planning out how it could all fit together in a nice and easy way. So first off, I had the pedal board itself with the dimensions, and I went off and got the dimensions of each piece of equipment that I need to fit inside that pedal board. And then I made some little cutouts to scale so that I could position these on the board and get a bit of a feel for it and really plan out this board well. I didn't want to move too much from my workflow, so I'd always have my effects on the left, my looper kind of in the middle, and my kick drum on the right, so it's easy to access from my right foot. Then I wanted to start positioning things just to get things right, where the power could go. Then it was a case of where I need cable holes going in to make sure I could get the cable holes in, but then obviously maximize the space on the board so I could get everything on and everything was in the board without needing to add things on as I'm setting up. It should just be plug in and play. So then once I was happy with that, I started working on the overall design and sketching out a bit of instruction. My brother Lewis, who's in the duo with me, also has a business that has a big workshop and lots of tools, and as part of that I wanted him to make a start on this board and really get it working and have all the tools at hand that need to go. So these were his instructions. The main thing I wanted to do was make a little bit of a bridge section over the top of the Voice Live so that I could put a lot of these auxiliary pedals on and make sure I had the clearance enough to shut the lid with all the auxiliary pedals on, just to make that work. So this was finally getting that bridge into place in a drawing form, and then we could kind of put it into play, and that would have my MC8 on it, the AB loopy switch, and the TC Helicon. On the right hand side, it was more about planning where everything else would go in terms of the power block for auxiliary power, my looper and my kick pedal, and making sure we had space for all the additional elements like the mic, switches and boards. So once I planned it, the board then arrived, this lovely big case. Sturdy enough. It is quite big, so it's just about just less than 1.2 meters wide and 450 tall. And then we wanted to make sure that once we got that, the first thing is the power is the main thing. It's always going to come in from the left, and I wanted that in and out selection with the Nutric power. So I've got those blocks set up. I had to raise them up ever so slightly so that they could fit in the bottom of the board. I'm then powering with these all these loop things into these connection junction boxes. And you can see underneath, we've got all the power in and routed using these junction boxes to make that work. Next, it was a case of positioning the items on the board to make sure it'd work and checking that the lid would close. You can see here that the mixer is probably the highest point with the angled connectors in, and it just gives me that 1.5 meter clearance, which was great. Next up, it was about routing the cables through, putting the holes in for the cables to make sure they could all fit in, and obviously attaching them via some Velcro tabs so I can pull them off. And then I made that bridge effect that we kind of talked about, and I had to pull that as tight as I could to the Voice Live so that the pedals would fit on and the lid would close. So we tested all that and it did work. Next up, it was about bringing all the leads into the pedal board, assigning it all. Luckily, from my last build, I had everything coloured up and coordinated. I also have a loom that goes up to my HPD20 that I wanted to make sure was in and fixed. And that all comes up from the right hand side, just underneath where my board is. But then you can see where everything else is now. All the cables are in, they're routed underneath. It all works very well. We've got power there working. We checked that the power was working before we kind of tidied everything up. And luckily with all that stuff on, it worked. Next, it's onto the belt packs to get those into play. And I wanted these in a way that I could attach them and detach them easily. And we found these nice little circle brackets in the workshop. And we put them on the board, give them a little test, just a nice little click in and click off. It's important that I can put these on and take them off because I have about 8 of these packs that I use, and I don't always just use them just in this board. Sometimes I do some hosting services and I want to connect them as a wireless mic for my PA system as well. But there'll be a few that live in the board and there's some that come off. And again, we use them in all sorts of different scenarios, really. You can see how they all fit on there nicely, all nice and coordinated. Before, they're all bunched up, they were on top of each other, and if there was any form of movement on my board, like if and they were just lying flat with the cables, you'd sometimes hear a bit of a crackle from moving connectors and things. Wasn't really applicable, wasn't really good for what I was doing. Also note that I do have a transmitter on there to go to my in-ears as well, and I use these Sennheiser blocks as my in-ears. So, another little thing I wanted to check, I had this 160 watt battery powered generator that I wanted to see if it could power it up. So I set that up, plugged it in, and to my amazement, I was absolutely gobsmacked that I was able to run all this stuff off that one battery thing. Now, I haven't got the drum module in, and it was running fine for about 10 minutes. But then we put it onto the floor. I wanted to actually run some music through it, actually do some looping or things like that. And actually, as I say, for 10 minutes, it was working absolutely fine. But then all of a sudden, we started hear a warning noise coming from the generator, which, and then all the power kind of cut off. So I think there's a little bit too much to make this board fully power off that one battery. However, certainly if I was to use just this to power the mixer and some of the auxiliary stuff and put the looper into another battery power thing that I already have set up. I have another smaller board with a battery version of the Looper X and the Head Rush that works fine. So maybe combining those two will work pretty well. But as you can see, this is the final board. It looks a hell of a lot neater. Everything's compact, and more importantly, everything is on my board and the lid will close. So it is quite a big board. It weighs about 28 to just shy of 30 kilograms. I fly with it maybe twice a year, but I know that everything's protected and safe inside of that box now. But that was it. The build is now done. I'm really happy with it. It fits in the boot of my car. It's easy enough to carry around and not too dissimilar to what I'm used to. So just time to close off the workshop.